Well, I'm back. And now it's time to talk about the 26 DreamWorks animated movies I genuinely consider good. So, on with the countdown.
You are a god.
Even if its story is not particularly strong, The Road to El Dorado is still a lot of fun to watch, providing good comedy and great music and animation. Although Hans Zimmer only does 2 instrumental scores for the film, he did contribute to some of the songs, which are pretty good, and reunited him with Elton John and Tim Rice, who he worked with on The Lion King. Although the score and songs aren't quite as good here as they were in that film, they are still pretty good overall. The animation looks great as well, especially the look of El Dorado. Where the film falls flat is its story, which, to be honest, is not particularly strong, and does ride a couple of cliches, including the lie revealed bit, though it thankfully doesn't drag it out as long as other movies. The Road to El Dorado is a flawed but fun experience for the whole family. Much like the Madagascar trilogy, Penguins of Madagascar definitely prioritises comedy above everything else, and the film is often very funny. I think one of my favourite scenes is when the penguins arrive in the desert and say they know what to do next, and then it cuts to them bouncing off the bounce house. It's genuinely hilarious. The film does also have a lot of fun action, as well as an interesting villain. Though there are some uninteresting characters and bad attempts at emotional depth, it's still a fun movie, and a much better spin-off than Minions. Dragon! How to Train Your Dragon 2 is a good continuation of the first movie, but it definitely has flaws. The pacing is slow at times, the humour isn't that funny, and some of the characterization is kind of off. The villain's motivation is simply to take over the world, which is really generic. Volga feels really sidelined. Her introduction doesn't have a whole lot of build-up, and I think showing her backstory at the beginning, instead of when she reunites with Hiccup, would have been more impactful. Even Li Shan's sudden appearance in Kung Fu Panda 3 at least had build-up in Kung Fu Panda 2, especially in that ending scene. But also, Valka is basically superfluous to the story, given that Hiccup still would have found the Alpha Dragon and could have learned about its role. And while her reunion with Stoik and their song is quite emotional, their time together feels really rushed before they once again become separated, and this time permanently because of Stoik's death. With that said, I think the choice to kill off Stoik in this movie was an interesting one, as it presents that conflict between Hiccup and Toothless, and causes the former to drive the latter away in anger. It enhances the friendship between the two in an interesting way that maintains problems, but ultimately is resolved by the end. And I do like Hiccup's arc of realising that not every bad person can be changed. It also maintains the intriguing action, animation and music that made the first film good. How to Train Your Dragon 2 is good overall, though it definitely doesn't hold a candle to the first movie.
Worst chicken fight ever.
As can be said with The Road to El Dorado, Chicken Run succeeds despite a problematic story, with the lie reveal bit in the third act being a major problem for me. Amidst its flawed story, however, Chicken Run is a good movie overall. Not only was this the first film in which DreamWorks and Aardman worked together, it was also Aardman's first feature film, and the animation looks amazing. Stop motion is honestly one of the few forms of animation that can hold up decades later, and the attention to detail here is spectacular. The main characters are good, but the side characters are great. Nick and Fetcher provide a lot of sharp comedy. A lot of the best lines of dialogue in the film come from Babs, who is just hilarious to watch. And the climax is a lot of fun to watch as well. Chicken Run is well animated and entertaining, though it doesn't quite live up to DreamWorks' other partner projects with Aardman.
Hey, Hedge. Draw.
Madagascar Escape to Africa and Madagascar 3 Europe's Most Wanted are pretty much on par with each other. They're both improvements over the first movie, but I don't know which one I like better. Madagascar Escape to Africa is definitely an improvement over Madagascar. Not only is the comedy funnier, but there's also a lot of emotional depth to it. And while it does feature the argument cliché, it also breathes life into Alex's character arc and seeing the importance of his family and friends. Despite similarities to The Lion King, whether intentional or not, the writing of the film is genuinely interesting, and Zuba and Mukunga are intriguing new characters, with Bernie Mac and Alec Baldwin being well cast as well. They also give Nana a bigger role than that of the previous film, and she makes for a hilarious antagonist to Alex. And then there's Madagascar 3. I don't really understand why Alex's parents disappear, but the rest of the film is good overall. It's not as poignant as the second film, but it is far funnier and wackier. The DreamWorks really wore out that Afro circus scene, didn't they? But yeah, Madagascar 3 does have a lot of good laughs, especially with Captain Dubois. Finding out she was voiced by Frances McDormand is pretty amazing. And the film does have a lie revealed bit, but it's actually used well here. Having Alex and his friends return to the zoo and contemplate that their true home is at the circus is well handled. Had the lie reveal bit not happened, they never would have come to this realization, and them just joining the circus wouldn't have had the same impact. Madagascar 2 is more poignant, but Madagascar 3 is funnier. But they both do good jobs with the vice versa. So, I guess it comes down to what you're looking for in a Madagascar movie, whether it be the more poignant one or the more comedic one. Something that does strike me as odd about the Croods is the character of Belt. His entire character is just shouting, dun, 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 and it gets annoying quickly. I think he might have been added as a comic relief, but that also doesn't add up, given that the main characters are actually a lot funnier. But on that note, The Croods is a fun and creative film, with entertaining characters, particularly in Grog, Eep and Guy, who are voiced very well by Nicolas Cage, Emma Stone and Ryan Reynolds. Reynolds appeared in both of DreamWorks' 2013 movies, and this one was clearly so much better. Some parts of the journey and some of the conflicts can be boring at times, though definitely not as boring as Dinosaur, or The Good Dinosaur for that matter. And the animation is really interesting, and doesn't suffer from the bizarre illusions that were attempted by either of these two movies. The part of the film I do find especially entertaining is when Grog tries to invent things, and none of them work particularly well. This is frequently funny, and it actually makes me want to see a Flintstones prequel about how Bedrock came to be. And what the heck they celebrate in December given that Christ hadn't been born. Though, if it's anything like Viva Rock Vegas. The Croods is visually stunning, and features a fair share of entertainment value and interesting characters. While it's not amazing, it is practically The Incredibles when you compare it to that piece of shit that came out the same year.
Abominable! Can you believe that?
The first 30 minutes of Abominable were great. I liked the way the story was set up, and I found it wholesome how Everest was looking for friends. The rest of the movie, though not quite as good, was still enjoyable to watch, even if the climax had some pretty questionable elements, like the fake-out death of the protagonist, and the twist villain, which, although unpredictable, also didn't add much to the story, if anything at all. Plus, why did she look like a cross between Merida from Brave and the babysitter from The Incredibles? Something that did surprise me, and in a good way, was Burnish's character development. When he was introduced, I thought he was going to be a copy of Charles Muntz from Up, but to my surprise, he ended up having a change of heart, and helping to keep Everest safe. I liked that. Despite its flaws, Abominable is not abominable at all.
Our world doesn't deserve you. Yet.
The first time I saw The Hidden World, I didn't think much of it, but I did always think the last 20 minutes were great, and the friendship between Hiccup and Toothless was wrapped up really well. Upon rewatching the movie, I stand by this, but I also now like the movie a lot more as a whole. The first act is pretty interesting, and I really like Hiccup's conflict about how to keep the dragon safe, and how it progresses through to the third act of him realising that he has to let go of Toothless in order to accomplish this. And their final goodbye is extremely poignant. The film also maintains the superb animation, music and action of the previous films, providing an improvement over that of the second film. That said, there are negatives. As with the second movie, the villain is just boring, and I don't remember anything about him. The movie does also feel a bit slow in the second act, and the humour just ain't funny, as can be said with the other two movies. There's a running joke in which Jonah Hill Viking tries to get with Hiccup's mum, and it's just boring. Could DreamWorks please cast Jonah Hill in a role where he's not a simp? Oh, and make sure it ain't this. But despite this, The Hidden World is a good conclusion to the trilogy, and the amazing third act especially helps to end it on a high note.
What's that?
Kung Fu Panda 3 is a good movie. While it is the weakest of the three Kung Fu Panda movies, it's also the most visually stunning. This film is one of the most gorgeous animated movies I've ever seen, and any scene in the spirit realm is pure eye candy. There are things I don't like about this movie. Not all the humour lands for me, although there are also funny jokes to make up for that. And the villain is actually very forgettable, and I barely remember anything about him. But despite this, it does expand the Kung Fu Panda universe in intriguing ways, including addressing the true effect of the Wuxi finger hold, and how it sends them to the spirit realm rather than somehow killing them, as was implied by Tai Lung in the first movie. As I think the third act, and the way so much is addressed in such an intriguing manner, is great. The voice acting is also still superb, and Bryan Cranston is a great newcomer as Poe's biological father Li Shan. And even though Kai is a bland villain, J.K. Simmons still gives it his all. Despite its flaws, Kung Fu Panda 3 is still a good movie.
Shut up!
The Croods: A New Age is an improvement on the first Croods movie. It does what a sequel should in expanding the universe, and honestly, providing even more creative and funny world building than that of the original. I also think it presents more interesting conflicts and arcs for the characters, particularly in how Guy tries to follow in the footsteps of his parents' friends, while Eep tries to show their daughter Dawn the fun she's had as a cave girl. It's a movie where almost every minute I wanted to see where it would go, even if not every minute was amazing. The film uses the lie revealed bit, and the characters disband, and the outcome, as usual, is predictable, and the film doesn't exactly subvert the cliché. And while I do like the relationship between Guy and Eep, it's also a little generic that they realise they were searching for their tomorrow, but it was each other all along. Despite this, The Croods: A New Age is a good movie, and unlike Boss Baby 2, it's an improvement on the original, as well as being a good movie.
I can burp my ABCs!
A-B-Z.
Over the Hedge suffers from a similar problem to Chicken Run, the lie revealed bit in the third act, which, as with that film, kind of irks me. With that said, I still think it's a very funny film, with great animation and a lot of great humour, particularly in Steve Carell's vocal performance as Hammy. I mean, who doesn't remember this guy? And the rest of the casting and vocal performances are pretty spot on as well, and they fit the characters. With this said, I know a couple of people have said that they never go over the hedge, but rather through it. But Vincent goes over the hedge at the end. Damn, Bruce Willis ended up in feuds with a lot of Vincents, didn't he? First Vincent Vega, then his patient in The Sixth Sense, and here Vincent the Bear. Weird.
Are there other bugs in your life?
Antz was the first animated DreamWorks movie. I remember liking it as a kid, and I still like it as an adult, though I definitely think it steered more towards adults than kids. While it's not as good a first movie as Toy Story, I do prefer it to A Bug's Life. I think the story and world building are more intriguing, primarily in how, unlike A Bug's Life, the insects are of different sizes, which gives the atmosphere a more threatening feel. And although Antz is less colourful than A Bug's Life, the colour palette nonetheless fits the darker tone and atmosphere of the movie. The casting choices are mostly pretty spot on, and although the characters were designed to resemble their voice actors, it's not nearly as uncanny as the character designs in Shark Tale, and the characters managed to look distinct from one another. The only casting choice I don't like is Christopher Walken, who, as much as I love him as an actor, doesn't fit the role of Cutter. Overall, Antz is intriguing, funny, and a good first movie for DreamWorks Animation.
That's right, Mr. Peabody!
Quiet, you.
This is actually the very first piece of Peabody-related media I ever watched, obviously not counting brief cameos. And this actually does make me intrigued. Even if you're not familiar with the source material, Mr. Peabody and Sherman is still a lot of fun to watch. I really like the relationship between Peabody and Sherman. It's a very wholesome connection, and provides an interesting anti-discrimination message. I also like Penny's character development in the movie, and while I was initially worried they would have her and Sherman fall in love, I was relieved that they just kept them friends by the end. The film is also visually appealing. The designs of every historical landscape look amazing, and certain effects add to the fun meter of the movie. I also think the actors are well cast, and I didn't realise that it was Alison Janney who voiced the bigoted child services agent Mrs. Grunion. Though are we really going to gloss over the fact that Patrick Warburton Agamemnon kidnapped her and she actually fell in love with him? If Beauty and the Beast showed no build-up or development in the relationship between Belle and Beast, and she just fell in love with him with no rhyme or reason, it would probably be something like this.
You want me to be the bad guy? Fine.
The Bad Guys is a movie that takes a variety of cliches, and, mostly, makes interesting plot subversions out of them. Granted, there are problems, like the argument bit, which as always has a very predictable outcome. I also think Mr. Snake having a change of heart, then abruptly joining the villain, was so weirdly executed. I guess it is kind of important to the story, but if they wanted it to be more subversive, they should have shown him abandon the others, and then gone back to them. And then reveal the plan he hatched to foil the villain, without showing him finally give Mr. Shark the lolly. I also don't find Mr. Piranha funny, and the toilet humour never made me laugh. But at least he does serve the story, just not so well in the field of comedy. With this said, there's a lot to like. I like its distinct animation style, which reminds me of various different directors' visions, including Quentin Tarantino and Edgar Wright. The film has similarities to Disney's Zootopia, and while the anti-discrimination message isn't executed quite as well as that film, the twist villain is so much better. Professor Marmalade is a good twist villain, and his motivations line up well. I especially think his plan to frame the bad guys while he takes on the image of the cute innocent guinea pig is rather smart. Despite the humour from Mr. Piranha not being funny, most of the jokes in the movie are actually funny. Especially the running joke with the grappling hook. I think the police chief voiced by Alex Borstein is hilarious, and seeing her gloat about her reputation for taking in Mr. Wolf, and then giving a speech when he finally turns himself in, genius.
Hear the roar!
Yep, Shrek Forever After is underrated. I think the concept of Shrek in a It's a Wonderful Life situation is an interesting one, and his arc of learning to embrace who he is and what he has comes full circle in this movie. Despite an abysmal predecessor that could very much be skipped over, Shrek Forever After is a fitting conclusion to the Shrek franchise. It's especially great that this film acknowledges how Shrek was the one who changed the minds of humans who discriminated against fairy tale creatures, and thus, had Shrek not existed, they would still be abused and discriminated against. And Rumpelstiltskin is such a great villain. He manages to be a combination of evil, smart, and hilarious at the same time, and continually succeeds with most of his schemes. Well, until the end. It also features a lot of the emotional depth that made the first two films great. Seeing Shrek cry for the first time, and Donkey seeing a more emotional side to him, Fiona starting to see a more sympathetic and selfless side to Shrek, and most especially, this last exchange.
You know, I always thought that I rescued you from the Dragon's Keep.
You did?
No, it was you that rescued me.
There are problems with the film though. A few of the jokes don't land so well, and there are plot holes regarding travel. For example, how did the witches take Shrek from his swamp to far, far away in an afternoon when it was established in Shrek 2 that it would take days to get there? But in spite of these, Shrek Forever After is a good conclusion to the Shrek franchise, and although a Shrek 5 is coming, I'm honestly not sure how they'll make it work. I guess we'll have to see.
Oh, all right. You can be a guardian again.
Rise of the Guardians is one of DreamWorks' most underrated movies. I really like the premise about how all these mythical creatures are associated with each other, and the casting choices are pretty spot on. And Jack Frost's arc for the film is actually rather emotionally gripping, and it really wraps up nicely. The film is also frequently fun to watch. Occasionally it will ease the fun to focus on more serious moments, but these are also well done, and balance out well with the more light-hearted elements. While I'm not particularly big on the villain's design, the rest of the animation looks great, and adds to the overall entertainment value. Rise of the Guardians is fun, emotional, and creative. How to Train Your Dragon is probably the DreamWorks equivalent of Coco. It has a lot of great moments, but the overuse of story cliches is what holds it back from achieving greatness as a whole. Most notably the protagonist being an outcast because he's different, and the main characters not liking each other, but then falling in love on their adventure. With that said, it's still a very good movie. As well as the animation, a particular aspect that needs attention drawn to it is the music. After collaborating with Hans Zimmer to bring us an amazing Kung Fu Panda score, John Powell returned to score How to Train Your Dragon on his own, and that Oscar nomination was warranted. The relationship between Hiccup and Toothless is very compelling, and the scene where Hiccup learns how to fly him feels like an absolute triumph, honestly on par with Miles learning to use his powers in Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, or Superman learning to fly in Man of Steel. And although it does take on the not judging based on appearances message, it does nonetheless do it in an intriguing way, with a message that encourages peace between humans and animals. Overall, How to Train Your Dragon is exciting, emotional, and beautifully animated.
Oh, shit! A rat!
Flushed Away is one of the funniest and most underrated animated films I've ever seen, and I'm tired of pretending it's not. Not everything about this film is great. The designs of the humans aren't great, and the film does have the whole protagonists don't like each other trope, as well as using a predictable misunderstanding cliche, though not handling it as badly as Shrek did, as much as I love Shrek. And yes, I know this is a movie about sewers, but some of the toilet humour doesn't do it for me.
Careful, mate! Those aren't chocolate buttons!
Yeah. But my god, almost everything else is great. The film is frequently hilarious, and like the Shrek movies, the cultural references are funny if you understand them, and even if you don't, they still work in the context of the story. The sewer world and the use of human-created objects to build it is also very creative, as is the villain's plan. The way it executes the message of the importance of family and friends is also well done in my opinion, as is how Roddy realises money won't buy him happiness, and that he'll be much happier with Rita than by himself in a huge house. It's built up and handled in a subtle manner. The voice actors are so perfectly cast, and perform their parts well, but the best performance would be Ian McKellen as the Toad. His line delivery makes his dialogue at least 10 times funnier than it already is. And Hugh Jackman and Kate Winslet bring a lot to their roles as well. It's a shame they haven't worked together since then, but at least it meant they never made a bad movie together. Right? Right?
What are you gonna do, big guy? Shit on me?
After a year including an awful stain on a great franchise, as well as a mediocre shitpost film, DreamWorks took a giant step forwards with Kung Fu Panda, a visually stunning, emotionally gripping masterpiece. And not only did they finally make proper use of Hans Zimmer again, they paired him up with John Powell, and they collaborated to produce another amazing score. I remember Doug Walker describing this film as the ultimate never judge a book by its cover movie, and I strongly agree. You wouldn't believe that a movie where Jack Black voices a panda learning Kung Fu could be great, yet it succeeds. And to add to that, Jack Black is probably the most perfectly cast actor in the film. But there's also the great casting and talents of Dustin Hoffman, Angelina Jolie, Ian McShane, and James Hong to add icing to that freshly baked cake. It also has great action scenes, whether they intend to be more serious or more comedic. But above all, Kung Fu Panda has a great message. Although it does follow the whole don't judge people based on appearances shtick, it does so in an intriguing way, primarily with the significance of the scroll. The scroll appears to be blank, but when Po has the conversation with his father about his secret ingredient soup, he realises that by believing he's special, and by seeing his reflection on the scroll, he himself is the secret ingredient stopping Tai Lung. As for the film itself, there was no secret ingredient to making it great. It was the work of an insanely talented cast and crew. Shrek was the film that changed DreamWorks Animation forever, and influenced comedy films of the noughties. Sometimes for better, sometimes, for worse. But this isn't something Shrek should be blamed for. Its setup and style of humour were done well for this film, and the film is also great as a whole. The way it subverts Disney and fairytale trends and traditions is really well done. From the opening scene, you know exactly what kind of film it's going to be, and it continues to be just that from there, with almost every pop song being used to great effect in the scenes they're used in. Through Shrek and Fiona's arcs, it provides brilliant messages about seeing the good in yourself, and not judging people based on looks. Well, when you ignore the excessive jokes about Lord Farquaad being short, which get old very quickly as well. The casting choices are perfect, with Mike Myers, Eddie Murphy, and Cameron Diaz breathing both humour and emotion into their line deliveries whenever appropriate, and John Lithgow bringing a lot of humour to his role as Farquaad. One of the few things that brings the film down is the misunderstanding part. It's overlong and predictable, and while it does bring one interesting use of visuals in how Fiona sees the knight armour and remembers how Shrek saved her in a knight helmet, it's otherwise really boring. Maybe if it was making fun of the misunderstanding cliché, it would be funny, but it's clearly not. Does this derail the entire film? Of course not. Overall, Shrek is creative, funny, emotionally gripping, and a ton of fun to watch, and deserves its place in the National Film Registry.
Underpants, no!
The fact that the Academy somehow deemed Boss Baby to be the superior DreamWorks film of 2017 is the biggest mystery of all. Captain Underpants, the first epic movie, is unironically amazing. I never read the books as a kid, but if this is a faithful adaptation, then I'm definitely intrigued. One of the things that makes me love this film so much is that it aims almost entirely for comedy, and doesn't try to shoehorn in forced emotional depth. The film does try small bursts of emotional depth, but it works in the context of the story, and flows naturally within the film's tone. The film does have George and Harold separated before reconciling for the third act, but it subverts the trope by having them become separated forcefully, and not because they chose to. And that friendship is not only believable, but it also sets the stepping stones for great comedy. And I also really like the way the film executes its message about how, even if you're separated, you can still be best friends. And this movie is hilarious. I laughed out loud frequently during this movie. The humour is creative and fast-paced, as it should be. And while I'm not usually one for gross humour, the film uses it well in the context of its story, and generates great humour. Captain Underpants and Professor Poopy Pants are both hilarious characters, and I like how they're given character besides simply being a superhero or supervillain, including showing the former's secret identity Mr. Krupp outside of school, and giving him character besides simply being a mean school principal. Captain Underpants, the first epic movie, is creative, hilarious, visually appealing, and when it wants to be, very emotionally gripping, and I don't get why people don't talk about it much.
No crack, Gromit. We've forgotten the crack.
Hands down one of the funniest parody films I've ever seen, and just like the first two Shrek films, you don't have to know the references in order to enjoy the film. Not only is the animation superb, and like the majority of stop-motion films has aged like fine wine, but the comedy is top-notch, and comes through the pacing and line delivery. As well as Peter Sallis bringing such comedic presence to Wallace, Ralph Fiennes and Helena Bonham Carter are also superb as Victor and Lady Tottington. And I also have to mention just how funny a lot of the side characters are, including the Vicar, the Constable, and Mrs. Mulch. It maintains the charm, creativity, and wit that made the Wallace and Gromit short so good, and, well, it's a Wallace and Gromit feature film. How can you not love it?
I want
To please. Oh, grand.
Kung Fu Panda 2 is one of those rare sequels that improves on the original. It ups the action, it ups the comedy, and most especially, it ups the drama. The way it ups the drama involves giving us Poe's backstory and giving more insight into the relationship between Poe and his adoptive father, Mr. Ping. And this is hugely poignant. The revelation at the end of the second act, in which Poe finds out what happened to his mother, is just heartbreaking. But this entire scene where the soothsayer tells him that his past won't define the rest of his journey is just brilliant. And providing a balance between drama and comedy, they round it off with this hilarious line.
I am Poe, and I'm gonna need a hat.
They also give us a brilliant new villain, voiced by the amazing Gary Oldman. And both him and the writers deliver the goods, providing Lord Shen with a threatening appearance, a devious voice, a truly diabolical scheme, and even some great comedy to balance it all out. The only major problem I have with the film is how most of the characters the film introduces don't really get a lot of screen time. While the Furious Five all warrant major roles and get their own moments to shine, I do wish the new characters had also had some more screen time, and given us more time to get to know them. But in spite of that, Kung Fu Panda 2 still delivers great action, great comedy, great drama, great animation, great music, and is an all-around great experience.
Hit it!
Shrek 2 is just so continually creative, funny, entertaining, and emotionally gripping, and another rare sequel that improves on the original. Granted, not all the jokes land, and there's some pretty transphobic ones.
And what does he find? Some gender-confused wolf.
It's a thong!
But almost everything else about this film works wonders. I love the way it continues Shrek's arc of him trying to love himself, in spite of the majority still seeing him as a monster. And I think his romance with Fiona is really legitimate, and it's great to see just how devoted to each other they really are. And my god, is this film funny. For every one joke that doesn't land, there are 5 that do. From the trumpet, to Donkey realising the fairy godmother is Prince Charming's mother, to Shrek and Donkey being arrested, it's just hilarious. And then we get to this scene, which is one of the greatest scenes in any film I've ever seen, maybe the best in animation. It manages to simultaneously balance hilarity, emotion, and excitement, with the most perfect song choice in any of the Shrek films. While I don't know if this cover is better than Bonnie Tyler's version, I think the inclusion of Saunders' cover in Shrek 2 is better than Tyler's in Footloose, because in the latter, it's really just a song playing in the background, though a great one nonetheless. Shrek 2 is hilarious and gripping, and one of the best sequels ever made.
I think this just might be my masterpiece.
The Prince of Egypt is one of the best animated films and musical films I've ever seen. Despite artistic license and an attempt at appealing towards the family demographic and not just adults, The Prince of Egypt manages to be a mature, visually stunning masterpiece that tells the story of Moses without dumbing down or sugarcoating anything. The music and songs are fantastic, and they have a serious nature to them, as the rest of the film does. The film goes in the direction of a serious tone and handles it perfectly. The themes are rich and fleshed out, and the way in which Moses and Ramses become separated due to their conflicting desires is devastating, but also rich and meaningful in the motivations of the characters. Despite the voice cast consisting mostly of celebrities, as can be said with many DreamWorks animated movies, they all do a good job here, and really fit the roles they voice, particularly Val Kilmer and Ralph Fiennes. This could easily be mistaken for a Disney movie, but even if it was, it'd still be pretty high on that list, honestly on par with the best movie of the Disney Renaissance, Beauty and the Beast. And although The Prince of Egypt takes a different approach to the majority of DreamWorks films that succeeded it, it's still a welcome, mature, and beautifully animated approach that gives it the title the best animated DreamWorks movie ever made. Much like the Madagascar shitting fuckery of arses. And the rest of the casting involved bollocking arseholes.